for Research at SUNY Downstate. I oversee basically clinical and public health research for our university. So SUNY Downstate is part of the State University of New York. We are located in Brooklyn. We're in central Brooklyn. We also have a hospital attached and 5 schools and colleges. Interestingly, there's a biotech incubator, and we also have, we host the BioVact, which is near Brooklyn Army Terminal in Brooklyn as well. So very friendly to founders and startups and small companies, large and big. And as a couple other things that I'm sort of responsible for, I sit on the executive committee of the Brooklyn Health Disparities Center. So we think a lot about inequities within health, especially as it affects those in Brooklyn. I also had a health equity research lab, PI for a few grants, one of which is a large training grant called Transport, which focuses on increasing the diversity within the health equity space. That's actually a very unique mechanism. It's a $20 million endowment grant. So what that means is that the federal government, the National Institutes of Health, has given us $10 million in 2017, and then renewed it for another $10 million, and we put that into an endowment fund. So we spin off of that program interest to support a number of different training programs, largely for those interested in pathways and health equity. And a couple of foundation grants and other semi grants as well. And in terms of service, I'm on the board of visitors for the Howard University College of Medicine Advisory Board, previously for Howard Hughes Medical Institute Center, and board of directors for a few nonprofits. Why am I telling you all of this? Because I would not have any of these sort of roles if it were not for investments in diversity. I started in high school being interested in health and medicine, really because of a program through the Morehouse School of Medicine, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. From there, as a high school student, I had an opportunity to travel to Tennessee State University, or TSU, to participate in another exposure program. My final year in high school, I participated in a program called SOAR at Xavier University. This program was started in 1977 to expose students who came from underrepresented groups to health sciences, to medicine. My first year in college, I spent my summer at Duke University in a medical education program. This picture that's to the right here is actually me with the director of that Duke University program, Maureen Collins. Over 20 years later, from when I participated in it as a student, I was invited back to Duke to give a talk. Very full circle for me. But without investments in these sort of programs, I would not have had these experiences. I would not be on this path that I'm on today. And it goes on. University of Albany. I had an opportunity to travel to Ethiopia through this NIH-funded program. And that's me dealing with cattle and testing for tuberculosis in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, on rural dairy farms, taking the results back to the lab and doing analyses and experiments, and we published the first author paper from that. But these experiences would not have existed if it were not for investments in person. Conference, specifically to try to decrease those investments called applicants or CRMS. I continue to go to this conference many, many years later now on the other side of the coin. And I started a PhD program at NYU School of Medicine, where I got my doctorate. And the only reason I attended that school was because of the dean at the time. His name was Joel Agbenai. He has since passed away. But Joel would often come to my university, Howard University, to speak about these opportunities as during research in a PhD program. And at the time, I really didn't have a really good understanding what that pathway was like. I was interested largely in medicine, but as I sort of investigated doing some of these programs, I learned about the path of research. And it was Joel who really gave me an opportunity to come visit NYU. I remember one time, I'll tell a quick story. Joel had come to Howard University to talk about these programs. He gave a talk. At the end of the talk, he said, hey, we're going to get a bite to eat. I said, this is Howard University. We don't have a lot of fancy restaurants. We have like maybe 5 guys down the street. So he said, okay, that works for me. So I said, okay. He said, how do I get there? So I said, I'll show you. I'll walk with you. Next thing you know, I'm eating like 5 Guys fries with the dean of NYU, and in this like greasy spoon Aspen place. And he's like, why don't you come up to visit NYU? And so next thing you know, he gives me a train ticket. I get on Amtrak. I come visit NYU. I sleep over. I stay in the dormitories. He gives me a personal tour of New York University School of Medicine. And here I am. I didn't think of myself as this phenomenal, young scientist where he needs to be specially inviting me before I even interviewed. And I felt amazing. I felt like I belonged in that environment. And I later learned that Joe does that for everybody. But that's just the type of person that he was. He wanted to make sure that everyone felt like they belonged in that environment. And that to me really speaks to this as a conclusion. So, but my success story and investments in diversity is not just unique to me, there are others. Anyone recognize anyone on the screen at all? Dr. Kizzy Corbett. So she now is an assistant professor at Harvard University, co-developer of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. She has a quote. She's also a product of investments in diversity. She said, I like to think of my impact during the pandemic is largely because of me being in a program called the Meyerhoff program. So this program is at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. It's for people from underrepresented minority groups to be tuned into STEM and really pushes forward this idea that you can be a scientist. So she's a product of investments in diversity. Jennifer Doudna, recent Nobel Prize winner for CRISPR technology. Professor at UC Berkeley, has an appointment at UCSF, phenomenal director of a research institute, also acknowledges the importance of diversity. There's nothing better than having people from different parts of the world, different cultural backgrounds, and different educational backgrounds who converge on a question or a problem. She said, in my experience, that type of collaboration often leads to the very best outcomes in science. And then finally, Eric Jarvis. Eric Jarvis used to be a professor at Duke University. He has a very interesting story. Also, Jennifer as well. She comes from Hawaii. You may not ever guess, but really was exposed to science and mentorship and opportunities that ordinarily, without these sort of investments, may not have happened. Eric Jarvis is from Harlem, here in New York City, was a dancer that had to decide between a path of science or dance. But thanks to mentorship, thanks to investments in programs like MART, which has been running since probably the 1980s, an NIH-funded or National Institute-funded program to invest in minorities in science, as well as the Ford Fellowship Foundation. Wrote a very interesting article on kind of surviving in these scientific spaces. If you're interested, read Dr. Jarvis's article. He quotes, the only way I found I was able to overcome the feeling of being less than was by being successful. So these investments in science have big payoffs for what we know about now. He's famous for tracing the neural basis of vocal learning. Anyone have any idea? I know it's kind of the words are kind of small. What do you think this is on the screen?
I love that.
You know that list. One person knows that list. You know it. This is a list of over 340 words that are deemed as flagged terms, meaning these terms have popped up in federal grants that have ultimately been canceled or terminated or even frozen. And so, as a university professor and principal investigator on a lot of federal research grants, we are instructed, really, our program officers, not to include these words if we expect to get any funding. because these words ultimately will lead to your grant and funding. And I've had to experience that. One of our grants that was designed to train clinicians and actually have an impact on their career and ultimately the impact that they're having on their local community was terminated. Fortunately, that grant was also reinstated, so we were more fortunate than others. But here are some of the facts. Over 5,000 NIH grants have been terminated since January of 2025, or terminated or frozen, so impacted. And currently, the loss from that, particularly for these grants, is 4.57 billion. It was a little bit higher, but a lot of those grants have been reinstated. A lot of the programs that I mentioned that had impacts for faculty on the previous slide no longer exist. They've been canceled. Programs, IMSD, I used to be a principal investigator for IMSD program at Weill Plant Medicine. MARC program, RISE program, PrEP, IRAC, Mosaic, and others, all of these are acronyms, but they've been designed to increase the diversity of the sciences, particularly our medical and life sciences. They've all been canceled. And even now, the NIH requires institutions to certify that they do not have DEI programs that are deemed in violation of the new policy in order to receive new grants, no matter what grant you have. If the institution expects to receive any sort of federal grants, they must certify that they are not essentially running DEI programs that are in violation of the new policy. So it's a very different environment than what it was in 2014 and prior to. So I think there was a colleague that said basically this, that diversity has been really under attack. And that's what a lot of us as faculty are feeling, that a lot of the efforts that we have been putting forward to increase the diversity within the life sciences are now being rolled back and are under threat. But I'm here to tell you that if we fully abandon that idea, we're going to abandon pathways to discovery and innovation. And I know that for a fact because we've done studies to show that diversity leads to innovation, diversity leads to new discoveries. This is just one example. Science teams made up of men and women produce more papers that are more novel and highly cited than just homogeneous groups. So just groups of men, or even just groups of women. When you have both together, when you have these heterogeneous groups, they lead to more papers that are more novel and more cited. This paper was an interesting discovery as well. It deemed that underrepresented groups, which was inclusive of both women and non-white scientists, produced higher rates of scientific novelty. They essentially took US PhD dissertations, 1.2 million of them, so quite a lot of these dissertations that are published, looked at the authors of those dissertations and tried to use natural language processing to determine whether new substantive concepts were being identified. And what that means, so for example, they took the first usage of HIV and the word monkey being linked together. They sort of deemed that as a new innovative concept or innovative idea. And that, at that point, that was 1987. So previously there had been references to HIV. Of course, previously you'll find publications referenced who worked with the word monkey. But this is the first time you see that together. So that sort of was their representation or marker for something innovative or something new that they see within that literature. And so that sort of innovation, they looked to see who was the author of it, if it was a woman or a non-white scientist, and then they looked to see if those new conceptual links are being taken up in the scientific community. Are people citing that work by Dr. Bruch as being, the founder of that particular concept or idea? And what they found was that novel contributions by underrepresented groups are taken up by other scholars at a lower rate. At a lower rate. They're not citing as much. They're not giving as much credit. They're not sort of building off of that scholarly work in the community as much as they are for others. And it was also found that students are more likely to become professors and researchers if they introduce novelty or have impactful novelty. And that impactful novelty is really dependent on your community being able to propagate that. Let's look at the likelihood of financial performance and the impact that diversity has on companies. So there was a study that was conducted by McKinsey and Company that basically showed in 2023, companies that had more women representation or more gender diversity within their executive teams were 18% more likely in that top quartile than compared to the rest of the other three quartiles to financially outperform those other companies. So the more diverse you are, the more likely you would have financial outperformance. And then you could even look at the reverse of the bottom quartile. So if you're in the bottom quartile of diversity, both in terms of gender and ethnicity, you were 66% more likely to underperform financially than the top quartile or the rest of the quartiles. And so those are pretty striking numbers, and they've been doing these studies for quite a while. This is not even the first year of 2020, it goes back to 2 more other studies as well. And the numbers keep increasing, honestly. It shows that diversity matters for those companies in terms of their performance financially. But we've known these sort of data we've known for many, many years. I want to bring it back home to a more personal story. This is Catalin Carrico on the left-hand side. She, about 2 years ago, was awarded a Nobel Prize for her discovery of her role in the mRNA vaccines for COVID-19. So many of us, if you've chosen, or many of your family members have probably taken these mRNA vaccines for COVID-19. You can thank Catalin and Dr. Drew Weissman. But Catalin Carrico is a bit of a unique case because she experienced a number of career obstacles that she talked about. She repeatedly failed to win grants. She was actually let go by her university. She was kicked out, really forced to retire. And largely by some of her colleagues seen as a second-class citizen because she was not originally born in the United States. There was a quote by a colleague. It says, Lambert respected Carrico, but also saw how her inability or unwillingness to navigate the system worked against her. The fact that she was an immigrant who spoke with an accent, that she was a woman in science, may have made it easier for her to be overlooked. But more than that, she didn't play the game. And so the point of this is that even if you are an internationally recognized scientist, a Nobel Prize winner, you can still be facing these sort of challenges within the scientific training path and the scientific enterprise that make it feel as if you don't belong, that you're not welcome, that you're not valued. And she was able to sort of persist through this. Think about how many people are not. And so it's not just about increasing the numbers within the pipeline. It's about making sure that these environments and that these systems are supporting growth and allowing people to thrive. That's how you get to the innovation. That's how you get to new discoveries. I want to take just the last couple minutes in this talk to talk about how we can really address these sort of systemic career barriers so that we aren't losing talent and innovation. It involves building inclusive pathways. So I'll talk about 3 things. First is recruitment. Some of these things may be obvious to many of you. Hopefully it's just a refresher. If we think about building inclusive pathways in the aspect of recruitment, how are we looking at our applicant pools? Whether it's hiring, whether it's reading applications for a PhD program or a degree program. How are we going about finding talent and making sure that we're looking at all corners of the United States, all corners of the globe to make sure that that talent is really representative of the applicant pool? Maybe it involves partnering with minority serving institutions or HBCUs, one-year colleges, places where they may not necessarily hear about these opportunities, and then tracking where those applicants come from. That's one thing that Joel Oppenheimer really did to make NYU a welcoming environment, constantly tracking the diversity of the applicant pool. And also engaging with those who are currently there, because those networks can help sort of expand yours as well. And then when you have those individuals in the spaces, making sure that people feel as if they belong, that they're part of the fabric of the institution, part of the fabric of the company. And you as leaders, so if you're founders or part of the team of engaging, making sure that these inclusive practices are part of the norm. Things like, just inclusive practices within meetings, rotating who leads discussions and not necessarily giving people, credit or not interrupting. Avoiding assumptions about people's backgrounds or family. And of course, building what I like to call mentorship networks, rather than just sort of one-off mentor matches. And I'll talk more about mentorship networks because we've done some studies around this and why I think it's really, really important. And then sponsorship. So sponsorship and mentorship are extremely important to me. I would not be in the space where I am today without it. And the sponsors, they have leverage. They create opportunities for folks. And sometimes it's things that we can do as leaders to really help promote this by promoting those within our company, promoting those within our spaces, not just sometimes with titles, but with responsibility, with acknowledgement, and making sure that people are part of a valued team. That's how you lead ultimately to retention. So we did a study back in 2020 to show that there is a mentorship gap. We examined career goals of over 1,300 biomedical postdoctoral researchers. So these are individuals who work in the biomedical space, who have a PhD, and are now doing additional training as a postdoc. We asked them, what are your career intentions? And what are those things that are influencing your career outcomes? Some postdocs, they want to go into the industry, some want to become faculty members. We asked them, what are the things that are influencing that career decision? And for many, it was aspects of self-worth or confidence in securing grants. But what we noticed about some was that there was a significant difference between mentorship, particularly career mentorship for well-represented individuals versus underrepresented groups. And we found that ultimately that mentorship predicts an intention to pursue a research faculty career. And early career researchers from underrepresented groups were less likely than other researchers to receive effective mentorship. So that got my lab really down this idea of studying mentorship and how we can use it as an intervention to enhance diversity within scientific training pathways. And I'm going to take 2 minutes to tell you about this story and then I'll wrap it up. Mentorship networks drive career success. Mentorship networks are defined as having more than one mentor, but those mentors are in a sort of structured way. They're focused on that mentee and that mentee's success. It's not just all that we have, number of mentors for each of these sort of needs, but you have a very sort of structured network that's helping you reach your goals, whether they're research goals or psychosocial goals or wellness goals or career advancement, but they're all working in a coordinated fashion. And so we wanted to sort of inquire, are mentor networks a better model than just having sort of that one mentor to help fulfill your mentoring needs? And do they make an impact or have an effect on grant success? So we did a study with NIH, or National Institutes of Health, K awardees. Now the K award is a career development award for a lot of young scientists and early career researchers. If you get a K, you have a high likelihood of being able to land a faculty position. If you're already in a faculty position and you have a K, you have a high likelihood for success in being able to tackle some of the emerging diseases. So we did a survey, 892 respondents, We asked them about the mentors within their mentoring network. If they just had one, that was fine. If they had none, that was okay too. But we asked them about the number of mentors and the roles that those mentors play. And we sort of largely defined those roles as either a research mentor, pretty self-explanatory, a coach who was focused primarily on professional goals, career advancement, competency, a connector, which was someone who leverages their network and their social capital, but more on the horizontal plane. Let me connect you to someone else. Many of us have done that before. And a sponsor, who also can connect, but they really would champion a position or influence. So more on the vertical level. They writing a letter of support for an application. An identity mentor, so someone who shares or either understands an identity that we may have about ourselves. And a peer mentor, who's at the same career stage. So of those different mentoring roles, we asked those NIHK awardees, so these are individuals who've been awarded a grant, who've been successful, what does their mentoring network look like? And so what we found was that having more mentors is associated with an increase in mentoring outcomes and an increase in different types of roles. So let me break that down. The more mentors you have, the more mentoring outcomes, or these things, actually go back, these things like publications, grants, guidance, connections, new positions, visibility, confidence, work-life balance, all of these things were outcomes of a mentoring relationship. And you may not get all of these sort of things fulfilled from one mentor. Sometimes it takes more than one. And that's largely what we found out, is that the more mentors you had, the more likelihood that you would have an increased number of mentoring outcomes, but also more roles to fulfill those mentors. Whereas like A, C, D, and E may all be research mentors. B, maybe like a coach, this may be a peer, this may be a sponsor. And that network was actually impactful as well, and I'll show you that in a second. So, have higher number of mentors of distinct mentoring roles, the more mentors you have, and the more likelihood you would have a higher number of distinct mentoring outcomes. And I have to give credit to Dr. Felicia Santiano, who's a health equity research analyst in my lab who did a lot of this analysis and work. She also showed that certain mentoring roles are more likely to be associated with certain types of mentoring outcomes. So you take the blue line here, for example, this represents a research mentor. And the closer it is to the outside of the circle, the higher likelihood it would lead to a certain mentoring outcome. So research mentors are more likely to get publications, grants. That makes a lot of sense, right? What about the sponsor? So a sponsor is the brown line here, more likely to lead to guidance and some connections, but primarily visibility, which you don't get as much from other mentoring roles. So, and you can see that sort of, just displayed in a different way here. I'm going to spare you the data. Of course, certain roles are more likely to be associated with certain mentoring outcomes. But what we found was that for underrepresented groups, having more mentors is actually more beneficial for these underrepresented minority individuals. Whereas for well-represented groups, there wasn't necessarily the case that would impact award score. So basically, if you're an underrepresented group, part of an underrepresented group, on average, K award scores are significantly higher for underrepresented individuals than their counterparts. Or essentially, with the NIH scale, higher means worse. So you scored worse on your grant if you were part of an underrepresented group. But you have the ability to catch up by having a stronger or increased structural mentoring network. And as you can see, with the more mentors you have, as that graph goes, the lower the award score, which means that you have a better grant and more successful, right? The final thing that I'll mention outside of mentorship and sponsorship really is access. I remember having and this piggybacks on Dr. Student's talk as well, an idea for a company. Really didn't know where to start. I knew a little bit about the space of startups, kind of educated myself with some colleagues, and mostly YouTube and TikTok University, as they say. And but when I was ready with, I found a co-founder, CTO, who was going to play that role, and we were at kind of this pre-seed stage. We said, well, do we really have, the capital to start this, or maybe we should just bootstrap it? And then ultimately, the idea kind of floundered. I wonder what it would have been like if I had known or had access to certain networks, people who could mentor me or encourage me within, certain spaces. And there have been studies around this. And one particular study that came out of Cornell showed that VCs backed Black founders after the Black Lives Matter movement, but it didn't last. And so part of, I think where I want to end this talk is just looking at some of these data. First of all, for New York, New York has been a huge investor in venture capital investment. Perhaps students know this, right? Nearly 6,000 companies, from what I found, 20% growth over the past 5 years, more than $3 billion in venture capital investment. But philanthropic dollars, venture capital, and federal grants really are, as you know, can be a gatekeeper to innovation. If you don't have access to that type of funding, you can have the greatest idea in the world. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to advance. And what we know is that founders of color, women, and those outside of traditional networks receive only a fraction of all investment. And so this particular study found that women-founded startups receive less than 2% of VC funding annually in the United States. Black founders receive less than 1% of funding. And Black startups funded by Black VCs tend to do better than those backed by non-Black VCs. I think a similar message that you mentioned. And so it's really important that we diversify our founders, but also the VCs. Diverse founders are more likely to solve unmet needs, reach underserved markets, and build resilient teams. And so I really want to end with this. I'm happy to have a conversation about this talk. As we think about recruitment, we're really trying to bring people in. As we think about belonging, we're trying to keep them there. As we think about mentorship, we're really trying to lift them up. And as we think about access, especially capital access, we want to ensure that their ideas can thrive. And that's diversity. And that is what we need to continue. We don't want to, as the saying goes, throw the baby out of the bathwater, because this is what leads to innovation. This is what leads to new discoveries. The people are relying on us for that. Thank you for your time.